Welcome to the Group of Five Focus podcast, where we take some time each week to highlight a few significant G5 matchups and showcase the power of the Group of Five. I'm your host, Brian Doppel. In this episode, I'll recap the action from Week 3, provide my G5 conference performance rankings, and look forward to Week 4, including a bunch of rivalry games and a potential upset. We'll get into it after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and much more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Let me tell you from personal experience, when I first started this podcast, I knew about Anchor, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the right tool for me. After a little poking around, I found that in fact it was, and when I had some questions when I first started my podcast, Anchor support was there to help. So if this sounds like it might be the tool for you to start your podcast, download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Okay, I'm going to do something new this week on the podcast and rank each conference's performance from 5 to 1 based on their Week 3 results. So let's go ahead and recap my number 5 performing conference in the Group of 5 this week, which was the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt went 2-9 in play against outside conferences, and that does not include the one in-conference game of the week, which was App versus Troy, which is, of course, an historic game following an exciting week after App beat number 6 Texas A&M down in College Station. College Game Day then came to Boone and had a heck of a time. If you haven't had a chance to see some of the scenes from College Game Day, go to my Twitter at G5FPod and take a look at some of the photos and videos that I posted, but also go to College Game Day's account. It looks like they posted a ton of really good stuff and really enjoyed their time in Boone. So great to see a G5 team getting some excellent national attention, and it's always great to be a Mountaineer. Elsewhere in the Sun Belt, however, things did not go so well. UL Monroe went to number 2 Alabama and lost bad 63-7. Texas State had a similar fate at number 17 Baylor. Coastal Carolina had one of the only highlights of the Sun Belt this week, beating Buffalo at home 38-26 to remain perfect at 3-0 on the season. South Alabama had a heck of a game at UCLA in the Rose Bowl. It really looked like the Jaguars were going to win, but UCLA came back there at the end, and the way UCLA players were celebrating in the locker room after that game, I think they know that they got away with one there. South Alabama was definitely the better team on Saturday. Speaking of Sunbelt teams going to Power 5 programs, Old Dominion faced an in-state opponent at Virginia on the grounds there at UVA on Saturday. And lost 16-14 in a difficult game as well. Low scoring affair, but at least all of the furry mascot friends were able to attend. Georgia Southern lost at UAB last week, nullifying my upset prediction for last week. I'm not doing so great at those this season, but I guess that's why they're called upsets. Marshall went to Bowling Green and lost in overtime by 3 points against a Bowling Green team that they have a lot of history with from their MAC days. But Bowling Green, who is seemingly the lesser opponent here, was able to pull off a huge win against Marshall just a week after Marshall defeated Notre Dame in South Bend. Arkansas State lost to Memphis, and Georgia State hosted Charlotte, unfortunately one of the worst teams in the Group of 5 this season so far, and Georgia State lost 42-41 at home against the 49ers. Not to be outdone, the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana went to Houston to play Rice and lost 33-21 on the road. So again, overall, the Sun Belt really struggled this week. There were some bright signs there, but Their performance warrants me ranking them 5th out of the group of 5 conferences for this week. It's worth noting that Troy played an excellent game at App State, and that confirms my suspicions that Troy might come out of the West in the Sun Belt this year. I think that they're a really strong team, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a few moments. Coming in at number 4 for my group of 5 conference performance rankings is the Mountain West, who finished at 4-4 this week, which doesn't include the Air Force versus Wyoming matchup on Friday evening, where Air Force went to Laramie and lost 17-14. Elsewhere in the Mountain West, things broke even. Fresno State unfortunately lost at number 7 USC. San Diego State lost at number 14 Utah. Colorado State went to Washington State and lost as well. And Nevada couldn't put up a single point at Iowa on Saturday. However, UNLV had an excellent game against North Texas at home. UNLV, in a strange Mountain West year, looks like the Rebels are trying to make a name for themselves and maybe make a play for the Mountain West this year. Boise State hosted UT Martin and came away with the win there as well. New Mexico hosted UTEP and won 27-10, and Hawaii got their first win of the season, hosting Duquesne with a score of 24-14. My number 3 group of 5 conference for the week is Conference USA, who finished at 4-6 as a conference this week. Some challenging games here as Louisiana Tech played at Clemson and lost 48-20, and UTSA went to in-state Texas, number 21 Texas, and lost 41-20 in a game that I really wished UTSA would have been able to pull off an upset there against that big in-state powerhouse at Texas. Western Kentucky looked like they had the win sealed against Indiana, but the Hoosiers came back in the fourth quarter, sending the game to overtime, and the Tops lost in overtime 33-30. I mentioned North Texas losing at UNLV, as well as Georgia Southern losing at UAB and Charlotte winning at Georgia State. But Middle Tennessee also hosted Tennessee State on Saturday and got a huge win, 49-6, which hopefully is a little morale boost there for Middle Tennessee State, who have struggled a bit this season. I also mentioned Rice's excellent win over the University of Louisiana, the Cajuns, who are struggling a bit this year, and a couple of other Conference USA teams, UTEP and Florida Atlantic, losing their respective matchups. UTEP at New Mexico and Florida Atlantic hosting UCF. The Golden Knights went down and got the win 40-14 over the Owls. My number 3 group of 5 conference for week 3 is the MAC. The MAC had a very interesting week. They went 5-7 overall for week 3, but they had some really promising performances. Toledo went to Ohio State and had a difficult time. They did score 21 points on the Buckeyes, but they allowed 77, so did not even get close to a win there, but a decent showing from the Rockets. Akron went to number 15 Tennessee and lost in similar fashion 63-6 as well. Western Michigan hosted number 23 Pittsburgh, and unfortunately the home field advantage wasn't enough for the Broncos. They lost 34-13. But the Battle of the Bell was an interesting game, at least for a while before until Cincinnati started to pull away. The Bearcats ultimately beat Miami of Ohio 38-17. Kent State got a nice big win over Long Island University, 63-10. Buffalo, who I was predicting would keep things interesting, and that they did as they visited Coastal Carolina. They lost 26-38, as I mentioned before. Central Michigan had a nice shutout win over Bucknell. 41-0 was the final score there. Ohio, the Bobcats, went to Iowa State and lost 43-10 in that game. Meanwhile, Ball State hosted Murray State and had a shutout there as well, 31-0. So a couple nice Maction shutouts here this week. Northern Illinois lost by 10 to Vanderbilt, and I know Vanderbilt, I've not had a ton of nice things to say about Vanderbilt in the past, but they are an SEC team, so anytime you can lose by just 10 to an SEC team, it's a pretty good showing for your program. So Coach Hammock and the Huskies had a decent game there against Vanderbilt. Again, Bowling Green with a huge upset over Marshall, a team that they are very familiar with and do not have very very happy thoughts about. So yeah, the Falcons had a nice win there on Saturday. But maybe the biggest win of the conference was Eastern Michigan as they traveled to Arizona State and got a win 30-21 on the road there in Arizona. So a huge win for the Eagles, and I believe another Power 5 coach was relieved of his duties as a result of losing to a Group of 5 team. So an unfortunate result for that coach, but hopefully some of these Power 5 programs will start to see that the Group of 5 is not as far away talent-wise as they think. My number one Group of 5 conference performance for this week is the American Athletic Conference. They went 6-4 on the week and had overall a very strong showing in week 3. South Florida went to number 18 Florida in Gainesville and only lost by 3 points. It would have been an incredible upset if the Bulls were able to pull it off, but they weren't able to get it done this week. But I'll talk in a little bit about whether or not they might be able to get it done this week. Again, Cincinnati got the win there in the Battle of the Bell. Temple hosted Rutgers right across the Delaware River there, and lost by 2 to a bad Rutgers team. They're not very good, but there are just so many challenges at Temple right now. So losing by 2 to a Power 5 team ultimately is not the end of the world. What is more challenging and perhaps perplexing is Houston, as they hosted Kansas this weekend, lost 48-30 to the Jayhawks in what is one of the most confusing storylines of this football season so far, how Kansas is 3-0 and Houston appeared to really just not have an answer for the Jayhawks. So Houston is now 1-2, having dropped games at Texas Tech and versus Kansas. Their only win of the season right now was week 1 at UTSA, where they won by 2 points. So we'll see if the Cougars can turn things around for the rest of the season here. That being said, Tulane got an excellent win at Kansas State this weekend, 17-10 behind Michael Pratt, passing for 176 yards. An excellent performance by the Green Wave. We'll see if they can keep it rolling this week. East Carolina hosted an in-state opponent in Campbell, the Campbell Fightin' Camels, and won 49-10 this week, while Tulsa hosted Jacksonville State, a future Group of 5 program, and Tulsa won 54-17. Memphis had a really nice win over Arkansas State, 44-32 at home, but unfortunately SMU went to Maryland, and in a game where I really thought the Mustangs had a good chance to beat the Terps, SMU lost 34-27, an unfortunate game. But UCF got a nice win on the road at Florida Atlantic, as I mentioned as well. So all in all, I think the American had the strongest showing of the Group of 5 conferences this week. But this could change. This could change at any point. Last week, I think we all would have put the Sun Belt at number 1. They were the talk of the town, so to speak. So it could just be a matter of time until they get back up there. All right, let's get to this week's matchups. In the American Athletic Conference, Temple hosts UMass in a game where they hope to get back on track, while Cincinnati hosts a Big Ten opponent in Indiana there in Cincinnati. So that'll be a great game. That Indiana-Cincinnati game is at 3:30, and it'll be on ESPN2 on Saturday. Memphis has an interesting game as they host North Texas as well. That should be a good one, while UCF hosts Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech, not a very strong ACC team, but we'll see how the Golden Knights are able to hold up, while ECU hosts Navy, a team that has really struggled this year. We'll see if Navy is able to do anything against the Pirates of ECU, but I think that ECU will probably take care of business there at home at Dowdy-Ficklen Stadium. That game's on Saturday at 6 p.m. In Conference USA, UTEP is hosting Boise State on Friday night at 9 o'clock. You can watch that on CBS Sports Network. That should be an interesting game between those two teams out west. Middle Tennessee State goes down to Miami on Saturday. We'll see how the Blue Raiders are able to do against a ranked Hurricane team down there in Miami on Saturday. Florida International goes to Western Kentucky. We'll see how those two teams face off against each other in a conference matchup that might end up having some Conference USA implications down the road. We'll see how things go this year. Louisiana Tech is traveling to South Alabama this week, so things might get heated there in Mobile. That game is at 7 o'clock, and you can watch it on ESPN+. While Charlotte and Florida Atlantic have Power 5 matchups, Charlotte travels to South Carolina to take on the Gamecocks, and the Owls of Florida Atlantic go to Purdue to take on the Boilermakers. There's some good action going on this week as well. On Saturday at noon, Kent State is going to Georgia to see if they can pull off an incredible upset. We'll be thinking about your Golden Flashes. The Central Michigan Chippewas are going to number 14 Penn State over there in Happy Valley to see if they can pull off an upset as well. Bowling Green heads down to SEC country to take on Mississippi State. But in the MAC, Buffalo is going to Eastern Michigan in a game that I think will be very interesting. I'm picking Eastern Michigan here, but I think Buffalo might be feeling confident after some of their performance against Coastal Carolina. They made some questionable decisions down the line that might have cost them the game, but I think they might be learning as they're going here, so they might have something to show Eastern Michigan. But EMU coming off that huge win at Arizona State, I think that they're riding high right now, and I think that they've got the upper hand in that game. Some very interesting Mountain West matchups as well this week. Nevada and Air Force are playing on Friday evening, as well as Boise State, who I mentioned earlier, going to UTEP. There are 2 MAC schools that are visiting Mountain West schools this week. Toledo goes to San Diego State in their first ever matchup, and Western Michigan goes to San Jose State in what I think is likely their first matchup as well. Elsewhere in the Mountain West, Colorado State hopes to get a nice win at home versus Sacramento State. We have an in-conference matchup between UNLV and Utah State. Utah State, who I was very high on to begin the season, has underperformed, and UNLV has really shattered a lot of expectations. So we'll see how that conference matchup goes. Elsewhere, Hawaii goes to New Mexico State, a future G5 program, between 2 programs who are struggling right now. It'll be interesting to see the outcome of that game. Will there be a ton of offense and a lack of defense, or vice versa? We never really know what sort of outcome with either of these teams. So it's really a true wild card of a game. It'll be interesting to see. And lastly, Wyoming is going to number 19 BYU to see what they can do there. That's a late game on Saturday, 10:15 kickoff on ESPN2. And a few interesting Sun Belt matchups as well this week. On Thursday, a game that just got bumped as I'm recording this Monday evening. Coastal Carolina at Georgia State at 7:30 p.m. on ESPN2 on Thursday. So be sure to tune in for that. Coastal, again, who's 3-0. Georgia State is 0-3, an inexplicable 0-3. And some might say an inexplicable 3-0 for Coastal. It'll be very interesting to see these 2 Sunbelt East teams facing off there in Atlanta. Will there be a home field advantage? Will the crowd turn out for that? That remains to be seen. I know that Georgia State's really trying to get folks in because tickets right now are as low as $3 for that game. So if you are in the Atlanta area and you're looking for something to do on Thursday, head out to Center Park Stadium in Atlanta and go pull for the Panthers. Or if you're a Chants fan, go ahead and pull for Coastal as well. But that should be a good one on Thursday. Georgia Southern is hosting Ball State on Saturday at 6 p.m. Between an interesting Sunbelt team in Georgia Southern. It's hard to tell what Georgia Southern is right now, but they're hosting a Ball State team that has a lot of unknowns as well. So it should be an interesting MAC Sunbelt matchup there. Old Dominion is hosting Arkansas State in a cross-division Sunbelt matchup there. Texas State's hoping to get things back on track as they host Houston Baptist this week. And another really interesting Sunbelt matchup that I'm looking forward to is Marshall at Troy this week at 7 o'clock. That's the NFL Network game this week. But Marshall at Troy, Marshall who beat Notre Dame but lost to Bowling Green. Troy who's just coming off a heartbreaker of a loss at App State. It'll be very interesting to see how these teams match up against each other. against each other. Two teams that are hoping to win their divisions and hopefully face off in the conference championship. So we'll see how this game goes. I'm right now, after watching Troy play last week, I'm leaning Troy, but Marshall, I mean, they had a huge win just 2 weeks ago. So they've shown that they can get it done. This will be a really good one, I think. And of course, App State is hosting the JMU Dukes in Boone this weekend. This is a historic rivalry from the FCS days. These two fan bases know each other well. There's a ton of mutual respect between these two fan bases. I know a lot of JMU folks are going to be coming down to Boone for this game. It's in reasonable driving distance, so I expect to see a lot of purple and gold around Boone this weekend. Really looking forward to seeing what this old rivalry looks like here in the Sun Belt, and as these two schools are both schools that I've attended, there's a bit at stake personally for me as well. So really looking forward to seeing if the Mountaineers are able to turn around after a crazy Troy game and be able to focus on the Dukes. But I'm here to tell you that JMU is not a typical FCS transition team in the group of five. JMU is going to come hungry to Boone on Saturday, so I would not be surprised if they catch App sort of licking their wounds a little bit from a challenging Troy game last week and pull off the win. It'll be a very interesting game, and I'm really looking forward to see that play out at the Rock on Saturday. Got a few rivalry games this week. First is the Iron Skillet between SMU and Texas Christian. This game has been played since 1915. So this is a huge historic rivalry in the state of Texas, and it has a lot of interesting implications as well, because TCU's head coach Sonny Dykes was just at SMU last year, and so he was at SMU from 2018 to 2021, and so making the switch over to TCU, over to the dark side, if you will, has been perplexing for many SMU fans. He had an excellent career at SMU, and couldn't say no when TCU came knocking. So an unfortunate loss for SMU, but this rivalry has historically been an incredible one. Again, they've been playing since 1915. TCU has the slight edge, 51-42 over SMU, and there's been 7 ties overall. Lately, really since like 1999, TCU has owned this rivalry. SMU has only won 4 times since 1999. However, SMU has won the last 2 matchups in this game. Of course, Sonny Dykes was the coach of those games, but SMU does have the most recent advantage, having won the last 2 of these games. So should be a really good Iron Skillet game this year. We'll of course pull for the Mustangs and see how it goes on Saturday. Another rivalry game being played this week is the battle for the Bayou bucket, and that's between Houston and Rice. This rivalry, which has been played since 1971, Houston has a huge advantage here. According to ESPN's FPI, they're giving Houston an 86% chance to win, but Houston coming off a devastating loss to Kansas. Rice coming off a big win against Louisiana, but also that doesn't. That there was a little bit of controversy around some of the actions of some players on Rice's team, so that might be causing a bit of a distraction this week. But Rice coming into this game at 2-1, Houston at 1-2. These teams have played a gajillion times. The Cougars have the edge, 32-11 over Rice. But this inner Houston matchup here, these stadiums, I looked it up earlier, that they're like less than 4 miles from each other, so they're very familiar with each other down in Houston. I think that University of Houston has an advantage here. I just think that they, especially recently, Houston hasn't lost in this game since 2010. They've won the last 6 games, last 6 meetings between these teams. I think that Houston in general is a stronger team this year, but we've already seen that Rice likes to upset. So we'll see how it goes in the Bayou bucket, the battle for the Bayou bucket between Houston and Rice this weekend. We've also got another battle for the bell this weekend. This one between Southern Miss and Tulane, a rivalry that's been played since 1979, and they're playing for the bell. Tulane, it has the advantage coming into this game. Of course, they are 3-0 this season, the Green Wave. They've had wins versus UMass, Alcorn State, and of course last week at Kansas State over a Big 12 opponent. So Tulane riding high, Southern Miss trying to get their feet under them as they're joining the new Sun Belt here. But Southern Miss last week had a nice win versus Northwestern State, but had a tough loss at 15 Miami and versus Liberty in 4 overtimes to start the season. So Southern Miss stronger than a lot of folks think, but not sure they're as strong as the fan base thinks they are. So that's no shade. I'm just saying I think that Tulane has the advantage based on their performance so far this season, but I won't be surprised if Southern Miss pulls off this upset either. The last rivalry this week is the Battle on the Bayou. This is for the wooden boot between University of Louisiana and Louisiana Monroe. These two teams have been playing since 1951, and the Cajuns have the advantage here. Only 31-25 though. This is a little more evenly matched historically than I would have expected. But of course, really since 2008, Monroe has only won 2 times. So this is a heated, somewhat local rivalry in the state of Louisiana. There's only so many G5 teams in the state of Louisiana, so UL and ULM have a lot of history here, and they've got a great game time here. Kickoff is at 8 p.m. Eastern on Saturday on ESPN+. The Cajuns have the advantage on ESPN's FPI as well, with a 77.2% chance to win. I'm leaning that way too. I know that the Cajuns aren't the Cajuns that we're used to, but I still think that they've got the edge over Monroe. But we'll see what the Warhawks have to say about that, because the Cajuns are coming off a pretty devastating loss to Rice last week. All right, I put out on Twitter that I was recording tonight and asked for any questions or topics. So I'll just really quickly go through some of these. Thanks to everyone that replied. I appreciate the interactions as always. And I'll get started with a question from Go Herd, Please Don't Die. That's at Go Herd, Please Don't Die on Twitter. And they asked, does Eastern Kentucky have an edge over Notre Dame given the transitive property? So if those of you who are not familiar with the mathematical concept of the transitive property, well, I can't explain it. I'm not a math guy. But basically, he's asking, or they are asking, because Eastern Kentucky beat Bowling Green in week 2, Bowling Green just beat Marshall last week, and Marshall beat Notre Dame in week 2. They're asking, in a theoretical world, if Eastern Kentucky were to face off against Notre Dame, would they have the advantage? And I am not one to argue with math or science, mostly because I don't understand them. And so to answer your question, I'm going to say yes. Eastern Kentucky has the edge over Notre Dame. If they were to face off, Eastern Kentucky would annihilate the Irish. It's not even a question, really. So I'll move on to the next question. At SMU Commenter, who I've had some nice interactions with. I appreciate that. They commented and said, it's Iron Skillet Week. Is the SMU TCU rivalry the best G5 P5 rivalry in college football? That's an excellent question. And I just discussed a little bit about the SMU TCU rivalry, and I think that it's definitely got a claim to be the best G5 P5 rivalry in college football. I would also throw out the Victory Barrel rivalry between ECU and NC State. I think that those two teams, well, I know those fan bases do not like each other, and those are usually pretty good games, especially historically. They've been pretty close. So I would put that one out there, as well as the Battle of the Brothers between Utah State and Utah, which has been played since 1892, as well as the Rocky Mountain Showdown. for the Rocky Mountain Showdown for the Centennial Cup that's been played since 1893 between Colorado State and Colorado. So I think that there are a few G5 P5 matchups that could stake the claim as the best one, but I absolutely think SMU TCU's got to be up there. This is going to be a feisty game on Saturday. I'm really looking forward to it. Funbelt Sports at Sunbelt_sports. Send me a question as well. Raging Cajuns. Well, I guess, yeah, it's a question. Raging Cajuns ... Can we bounce back from this loss? And I'm here to inject a little bit of encouragement into the Raging Cajuns fan base here. Yes, a tough, inexplicable loss at Rice, but a nice win versus EMU at home, and another nice win to start the season versus Southeastern Louisiana State. So I think that Louisiana is going to be okay. I think that they're going to rebound. However, if they're going to, this is their chance, because after ULM this week, they're hosting South Alabama, at Marshall versus Arkansas State, at USM versus Troy versus Georgia Southern. I mean, the Sun Belt is just, it's so crazy, some of these schedules. So I think ULM is their best chance to bounce back so that they can go to South Alabama strong, because South Alabama is coming for the Sun Belt West. So the Cajuns are going to have to put up a stand against them, and a win against Marshall would do a lot of help for the Cajuns as well. So I think they're going to bounce back, but if they're going to, I think this is their chance. On a similar note, College Fantasy Football on IG, at CFF on IG, this is on Twitter, asked the question, after the letdown versus Bowling Green, can Marshall bounce back to beat Troy? And if so, by more than App State? That's a really interesting question. So this is another bounce back question, and I think it's an interesting one to consider. Marshall and Troy, both teams that are not, as far as I'm aware, were not favored statistically to win their divisions this year, but who both fan bases have the expectations, both teams have the expectations that they're going to compete for the top of the Sun Belt this year. So I think Marshall has a really good opportunity to bounce back here versus Troy. My only concern is that Troy, they technically got the loss last week against App State, but they really won every facet of the game except for that last play. Troy's a very good team coming out of the West, and so I think they might give Marshall a hard time. So can Marshall bounce back? Yes. Will they? That remains to be seen. At TallTexan89 wrote in on Twitter, he said, on a scale of microwave hot pocket to surface of the sun, how hot is Jake Spavital's seat right now? And someone else at App State General commented, those two temperatures are the same, and that is true scientifically. That is accurate. But if we could just talk about Texas State right now, a team that has been struggling this season. They're 1-2. Their one win was hosting FIU, but they have pretty bad losses at Nevada and at Baylor. So is Texas State underperforming? I'm not so sure. They're hosting Houston Baptist this week, so this is a really good opportunity for the Bobcats to get back on track there in San Marcos before they hit a really challenging slate at JMU versus App, at Troy, the next three games after Houston Baptist. So I think that this week is Texas State's best chance of getting a win over the next month. But honestly, I'm not sure how hot Spavital's seat is right now. I know his record is not great. His head coaching record is 10-29. I just don't know that Texas State has another option that they could go to mid-season that could put them in a better position. So how hot is his seat? I would say it's hot, but I don't know that anything's going to happen mid-season. I think that if any changes are going to take place there, it's probably going to be towards at the end of the season, depending on how things go down. And lastly, at JP Miller 1717 asked, is Georgia State the best 0-3 team in the country? And I'll agree with App Predictions, who just said flatly yes. I think they are. I think Georgia State is the best 0-3 team. It's hard to say that a team can be the best 0-3 team, but their losses at South Carolina and versus North Carolina and versus Charlotte inexplicably. I'm looking at the other options here. New Mexico State is 0-4. Colorado State 0-3. Colorado, the Buffaloes, are 0-3. Buffalo, the Buffalo Bulls are 0-3. And Georgia State is 0-3. I think Georgia State's got to be the best of that group. Their losses have been close ones. They've been playing good teams. The Charlotte game I cannot explain. And also, for what it's worth, the fact that so few people are coming out to Georgia State games is just baffling to me. I'm not interested in hearing that there are so many other things to do on a Saturday in Atlanta. Atlanta is an enormous city, and so and I know that the Georgia State fans are out there. So it's just a matter of getting the fans to the stands to actually create a home field advantage. So hopefully they'll be able to bounce back here. They got a good primetime game on ESPN2 this week, hosting Coastal, and then they're at Army versus in-state rival, whether they like it or not, Georgia Southern. And App versus ODU. I mean, man, it's not getting any easier for Georgia State. So hopefully some of these games can just be flipped around, and they can figure out what it is that they need to do to get on the win column, because that's where they belong. Each week, I also share a matchup that I'm putting on Upset Alert. This matchup always contains at least one team ranked in the top 25 by the AP, or granted at least a 70% chance to win according to ESPN's Football Power Index. This week, the team that I predict will upset their opponent is the South Florida Bulls in their matchup against the Louisville Cardinals. This matchup is on Saturday at noon Eastern at Cardinal Stadium in Louisville, Kentucky, and you can watch it on ESPN3. ESPN's Football Power Index has Louisville with an 88.4% chance to win this game, but I think the Bulls are ready to pull off the upset. Here's why. Malik Cunningham. That's the name that everybody knows for the Louisville Cardinals. He is their passing and rushing leader for this season. If South Florida can find a way to contain Malik Cunningham, then they are in good shape for this game. Their quarterback, Jerry Bohannon, has passed for 500 yards and unfortunately has also thrown 4 interceptions and 0 passing touchdowns. However, last week, he ran for over 100 yards and a rushing touchdown versus the Florida Gators. So the answer here is at quarterback. If South Florida can contain Malik Cunningham, and if Jerry Bohannon can find his way to the end zone, whether it is by air or by foot, then the Bulls are in good shape. They also have another running back, Brian Batty, who has 27 carries, 269 yards, and 3 touchdowns this season. And their receivers are doing a great job. Their leading wide receiver is Xavier Weaver, and he has 20 receptions for 252 yards this season. The Bulls have the pieces. It is just a matter of putting it together. They're coming into this game. Both of these teams are at 1-2. South Florida has a win versus Howard, but have lost to 2 ranked opponents. Number 25 BYU and number 18 Florida. This is a team that, if given the right opportunity, I think that they can pull off this upset. Louisville's losses are versus Florida State and Syracuse, and their only win is at UCF this year. So that's not a knock on UCF. UCF, a very strong program, but Louisville's only win is at UCF. I think that this is a really great opportunity for the Bulls to pull off the upset here. If not straight up, then to at least cover the spread, which is 13.5 right now. So I really think that South Florida's got a shot here. On the defensive side, South Florida is only allowing 207 yards per game on the ground, and 232 through the air. So a bit more through the air, but that's going to be key. Cunningham can throw the ball as well as run, although he's only got 1 touchdown to 3 interceptions this year. So if South Florida can apply the pressure, capitalize on any mistakes that Cunningham makes, try to contain him rushing as well, I think that they can pull off this upset. It is really just a matter of whether or not they can do it. If they can, I think it's going to be a very close game, and I think that it's going to be a low-scoring affair. I think their best chance to win is by keeping Cunningham out of the end zone, and I think it's going to be close because I just don't know about South Florida's offense either. So I think it'll be close if they're able to pull off this win. I'm thinking it's going to be something like 14-17 or 17-20, something like that. I'll say that my final pick for this game is South Florida 17-14 over Louisville, and that's my Group of 5 upset alert of the week. Thanks for joining me this week on the Group of 5 Focus podcast. How do you feel about my picks? Did I miss any historic rivalries? Do you have any suggestions for upcoming matchups that I should preview? Reach out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at G5FPod to join the conversation and let me know. And if you haven't already, please follow, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice, and be sure to share it with your favorite Group of 5 fans. That's all for this week on the Group of 5 Focus podcast. Until next time, my question for you is, what is one thing you can do to showcase the power of the Group of 5?